We're in the new normal. So enjoy your new normal. It's the 4th of May. May the 4th be with you. This is the 5th episode of Cruise. And my name's Craig Campbell. And this is my partner, this is Mr. Jim Grant. And hello, hi Jim. And he's the eyes and ears of our news roundup and gives a loose framework to what we're doing. And I'm the loose cannon, I guess you could refer to me as. Can you tell us, Jim, what's happening? What do we got going on? What's coming up?
Coming up on episode 5 of The Cruise, we've got the ghost of a masturbating ape haunts the hallways of a grand country estate in Dorset.
Again?
We're going to be looking at
Is he back?
more evidence of the virus coming from the Wuhan laboratory. We're going to be covering a little bit more about the secretive Sage Group, touching upon the BBC Panorama show. That's the COVID news. There'll be many more of it. Also, looking into vitamin D levels and how that affects the coronavirus. In non-coronavirus news, we're going to be looking at tectonic plate activity discovered on the moon. Tesla is an electricity provider in the UK, and a new type of mammal discovered. That is if we can blitz them all in our new, no longer than 90-minute format. We know.
Is 90 the cutoff? Is not because I think closer. Let's go closer to an hour because you and I can kick it always. Yeah. We can always. God, we take an hour to say hello, which is great, but then we run out of light. Jim's and my problem. We run out of light. So yeah, it's been. Pretty for me. It just gets more and more nefarious. I think most people feel the lid's tightening and the water's getting hotter and the bubbles are starting and everyone's feeling the pressure because it seems like the whole world's opening up, or to some degree, maybe it's just my keyhole myopia that makes me feel that way, but a lot of the world is reducing its restrictions of lockdown. A lot of parts of the states have completely collapsed. It seems to be, it is state to state there as far as freedom and continued lockdown measures go. But it seems we're here in the UK. We're like normal. We're like dentistry for these people. They're like, no, you gotta stay in your basements for another 3 years. Until the 35 of us that are in bed with the 37 of these other guys who we all have something in common with, that we're all paid by the same people, until we decide that you get to leave with. Have you heard we got the passports coming? The mandatory immunization passports. Have you heard about these, Jim?
I haven't, but we can look into them on another show, perhaps. I always like to source what we say.
Yeah, but, that's where we're at. We're looking at being given special privileges, whatever it is, including like freedom from our homes for any length of time. It appears until we have hit certain criteria in our passports. Which this is why from the beginning, and I don't know if this is insurrection to say it, but I have always said that we are relying on the insubordination of American citizens standing up for what is entirely within their rights to do under their Constitution, which is the power of their country. It's the essence of what their country is. So a lot of people, think all these people protesting against being locked in the States are maniacs and they're spreading the virus, and it's just, it's a bigger zombie film now that these people are asserting their rights. They are breaking no laws, zero laws. They are within perfectly the diktats of what their founding fathers decided that the people should have as inalienable rights, I think they call it, and then I forget how you say the word, but the rights that are in you before anyone bestows them upon you. The God-given rights, I guess, as you wish to call them. So, that's I've always felt is our only way out of this, because that's the only way that you can show these pricks that the new normal is what we used to do. That's what's normal now, not having to have our faces recognized before we get on every bus in town or on any train in town or decide that we want to go to Paris for the damn weekend. That's not what the new normal is or needs to be. But that's what these freaks want to do to us. And again, I stress that's why it had to happen in terms of like breaking down the goddamn walls, which is what parts of America has done, because that's the only way you show these pricks that they don't hold on to what the new normal is. It's the people who go to their shops and open them up and serve other people who aren't afraid. Not afraid like the police that you see moving in on the Assange protesters in the UK here, or the police that you see arresting people speaking in town squares in Glastonbury in the UK similarly. It seems like that the shortage of PPE in the UK has extended to the authoritarian police state. That's a little odd thing as well, you know. So if you're gonna like bag people up and take them away, could you show the respect of actually putting on a mask yourselves or some gloves, or showing that you believe in the ridiculousness that we're under a huge threat of something that's going to kill us in our millions? Because if you can't even pretend to believe in it, it's really hard for us to believe in it, officers, if there's any way. You know, we just are living in a mad world, Jim, where this behavior is allowed to happen. And it's also, why are you arresting one person in front of 150 people who are wandering around downtown, who also are not social distancing as you're requiring, and you're arresting them under the new provisions which don't allow for these new behaviors, apparently. You know, we're in a mad world where I know what that behavior leads to. It leads to ostracization of individuals. It leads to criminal underclass. When you do it to juveniles, it leads to a distrust of the state. These are studied things. These are known things. If you're not going to arrest everybody, you can arrest nobody. Do you get that? Do you get that? That's how law and equality must work. Otherwise, you just live, what you're seeing now is the police empowering their powers against certain individuals, which is authoritarian Stasi land. And that's what's been going on in, they speak of this right now in China, Jim, strangely enough. You and I both know we're not hearing a whole bunch about the previous rebellious underclass of even Wuhan, but China in general. If you recall, prior to this entire kerfuffle globally, there used to be a lot of backchat against the communist Chinese regime. And now there's pretty much, you just don't hear of it. You don't hear of anybody getting interrogated. And you know that, you know, statistically, telephone records are telling us that between 21 and 2 million people are likely to have disappeared during this like smokescreen. So it's Monday. We got a lot going on, and we're gonna bang through this as quickly as we can and keep it as entertaining as we can for you. And I'm gonna hand over to Jim Grant to bring us into something that's specific to our interests.
Well, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. We know that about politicians, and that's what they've done with COVID. However, that doesn't mean that I was against the inch in the first place. I was in favour of the lockdown.
Because you're not an asshole, Jim.
Yeah.
Because you're not an asshole.
I can see a logic in that. I can see a flattening the curve logic in that.
There was some logic.
I see absolutely no logic in keeping the borders open while we're doing that. So, but I was all in favour of closing the borders down and a lockdown for about a month to see if we can flatten that curve. So I don't want to be in any way that I'm anti-lockdown. However, what's gone beyond that is not something that I'm a fan of. And I also can see both sides of the point of view of lockdown. Continual lockdown will help reduce the spread. However, I question whether it will, if we continue the lockdown, will we see a point of diminishing returns include of economic turndown? And people go, money's not important. It is when you start to starve, and it is when businesses go under and the employees don't have the money, and that can lead to homelessness and starvation. And also, if people aren't producing the food, we're going to have problems with the food supply. So I don't say the lockdown is pointless. I do say that there may be a point of diminishing returns in terms of saving human lives and putting people in problems. But let's go on to something more light-hearted to begin with. It's from
and its credibility fell apart comprehensively as soon as they started to pretend that those putting up 5G like a rash around the country and the world in the towers were key workers. As soon as we got into the ambiguity of the hyper state, the hyper unvoted for technology state goes into high gear. Things like the military still shipping to Saudi Arabia right now, which we know is feeding war crimes in Yemen. All of this infrastructure just keeps pounding and chugging along while they tell you you can't go to the beach and you're not allowed to have a suntan and you can't go for a walk in the park more than twice a day. All that falls apart as soon as you consider guys who are on the poles putting up a soup of electromagnetic energy for us, which one way or the other, it's going to happen. Some people are going to get cooked downtown. We're in this world where you can't fight City Hall. We're on our backs. We're being experimented on by an authoritarian state. We get that. But you don't have to pretend that the pricks on a pole putting that shit up 24/7 need to do it when the rest of us are aggrieved and aggravated in our personal lives by being locked in our homes. Those are assholes that can still break down on the highway. Those are still dickheads who got to go into a place and get a cup of coffee and shake hands with people and breathe on shit and touch products and other people touch them. And if you want us to buy into all this fucking zombie film, everyone's going to die if we leave our homes for more than a minute nonsense, then you've got to get the hypocrisy out of it. The hypocrisy has to go.
I just want to make it clear that we're not in the 5G causes or spreads the virus camp, and we will do.
But you know, if I can interrupt, Jim,
the cruise podcast, the Viagra,
Jim,
see how long it stays up.
We don't got to tell them any of that because, like, you and I have never ever claimed that 5G caused COVID-19. Never in our lives have we ever said that. That's something. But I've been, and you have, I'm sure as well, been attacked for that belief. I have.
I mean, I've always made it pretty clear that I'm not in that camp. However, part of the authoritarian hypocrisy you were pointing out is an attack on common sense, and they edit out little bits here and there, take things out of context. We've seen this around people around the world. So I just wanted to put it in nice, plain English.
Well done.
We're not in that camp, so no one can have a take a pop at us for that.
But there's other stuff. There's other stuff. Keep watching.
Yeah. We'll do a whole episode on that at some point, breaking down nice scientific explanations, documents, and congressional testimony. I've got a good archive of that, and we'll give a fair. But I don't think the time is to go into it. That needs a whole show on itself. I think.
Especially when you've got monkeys throwing shit coming up. You know.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, it's my favourite article. We have. Oh, and I'd also like to point out, that a lot of those engineers putting up that stuff, they've got families.
They abs 100%, but they're not key fucking workers. Sorry, sir. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. So, and again, going back to episode 1, we always are we're not in the pro wrestling paradigm. Just because we love cats doesn't mean that we say that we hate dogs. Think for yourselves. We're political atheists. We're just calling it as we see it. And it would be very easy to take some of our stuff out of context. But we know you, the cruise listeners, aren't like that. But we also know that there are people our podcast is starting to grow that can take a lot of clips here, little clips there, as media things do, and take things out of context. I always like to just bring things down. So here's a clip to say, look, if you wanted to believe the out of context stuff, here's what we actually said. So here we are, our first article of the evening. This is from Mark Hodge. This is actually on the 7th of August 2016, so it's quite a time out. But I wanted to have a little bit of a light-hearted opening to the show. So it's not exactly current news, but hey, we let's have a laugh on this podcast as well as calling it as we see it with the news. And this is called Spank the Monkey, the ghost of a masturbating ape haunts the hallways of a grand country estate in Dorset. Haunted Athelhampton Hall is a popular wedding venue with romantic spook hunters. Now, I wanted to preface it by saying it was from August 2016, just in case anyone did think that was where Boris Johnson was actually spending his recuperation time. So just to make certain that no one got the two confused. Where was he?
That just feels racist. I don't know how it feels racist, but there's some racism in there. I think if you compare Boris Johnson to an orangutan, you got,
just a masturbating ape, really. But
I like that one. Do you remember that ape that they figured out was cognitive of the future because he was hiding rocks, I believe, in the Stockholm Zoo? Do you remember that story? Really interesting. It's the first case, I believe, in the primate study that they realized that this pretty pissed off older male ape would just continually all day, quite slyly, put rocks in a pile that were strategic to where school kids would like line up to look, and then he'd whip fucking rocks at them. And it was a real insight. I believe it was one of the first times they realized that type of ape planned for the future. It was one of the first incidences that they had proven that they're like, when those cunts show up later, I'm gonna fucking... And he'd just be like, at the same time when he's eating bananas and shit, he's like moving rocks behind a planter and stuff to get himself ready for the big day.
Well, he was smarter than the people who failed to stock up on food and loo roll. So, not planning for the future. So, the ghost of a randy monkey haunts the halls of a grand English country estate where romantic spook hunters fly to tie the knot. I do hope they don't spend the wedding night there as well. They might get an unexpected threesome.
Where down in Dorset was it? That'd be good, though.
Applehampton Hall in Dorset, near Dorchester. And I'd like to point out this article was sent to us by one of our cruise listeners. So big heads up,
nice.
Andy. If any cruise podcast people think you've got any articles that you'd like us to cover, if they're funny, we don't care when they are, but if they're news, then we'd like them to be up to date and everything. Continue. All you have to do is tag in the cruise podcast page and we'll find it. And if we like it, we'll bring it on air and give you a credit for that. So thank you to Danny, who I believe is in Canada. Moving on to some more serious news. This is 3rd of May, so yesterday. And this is by Jordan Fabian, Jennifer Jacobs, and Ian Marlowe of Bloomberg. This is Trump promises conclusive US report on virus's China origins. US President Donald Trump promised a conclusive report on the Chinese origins of the coronavirus outbreak, showing relations between the world's biggest economies are set to remain rocky at least until the next election 6 months from now. Trump pledged the report Sunday in a virtual town hall with Fox News, in which he added that he had little doubt that Beijing misled the world about the scale and risk of the disease. Earlier, Secretary of State Michael Pompeo said, enormous evidence shows the COVID-19 outbreak began in a laboratory in central Chinese city of Wuhan without providing evidence to support his claims. Perhaps he'd like to go and listen to our cruise podcast episode 2, where we gave...
Bring yourself up to speed.
Yeah, it's a quick little plug for us there. So,
do you think
cruise episode 2, it's entitled The Coronavirus Origins. We break down a lot of this kind of stuff about a month before this article comes down with all the different articles that we've reached. Did we not, Mr. Campbell? I hate to say I told you so. Actually, I don't hate to. I love it.
Do you think they'll bring Colin Powell back out of retirement to make the announcement of the evidence?
It went so well with Iraq, didn't it?
Here's the COVID-19 Wuhan flu. It's right here. I got it in my bottle in my pocket. What a lunatic. That guy should be on the gallows, but I digress. We're just, if I can just say, this is not going to a good place, and you and I know it. I think I mentioned it to you earlier, this is a brinkmanship game. If it's the 5D chess of a Trump, that same as with North Korea, same with Iran, brinkmanship politics all the time, hyper conflict at loggerheads constantly to get the best deal. And to me, this, Jim, just seems like they're not getting into the specifics, but they're accusing in the most obtuse and over the top way. And that it scares me a little bit, if I can be honest. It's just they're making very big accusations, which have great gravity of responsibility, and they're unable to prove what they're talking about, because what's known about that lab and these types of studies is a many faceted thing, with many players involved, as you know, and it's certainly not just the Chinese. So that this is being thrown front and center tells me that there's something much bigger afoot.
Also about that fella being sent to the gallows, we do almost
Colin Powell.
We do obviously advocate that he is given a jury of his peers first, and that should only happen should he be found guilty. Everyone is entitled to a free and fair trial. So moving on to our next article, the Wuhan biosafety expert admits widespread security and maintenance concerns at China's top secret labs, which carry out research on lethal diseases. This is by Glenn Owen for the Mail on Sunday, and it's from the 2nd of May. Pressure was last night building on Beijing following the leak of a bombshell intelligence dossier, which accuses China of having lied about COVID-19. The dossier, which has been circulated between Western governments, including Britain, also says China persecuted whistleblowers. Gee, Craig, you reckon?
No.
It is also likely to increase calls for China
like
to
Julian
pay
Assange?
to pay reparations to other countries if the claims are substantiated, with Trump already demanding $1 trillion. International pressure was last night building on Beijing following the leak of a bombshell. Basically, it just rereads the entire thing there. But I only really like to read the headlines so we can sort of blitz them. All the articles will be on the comment section of our cruise Facebook
you want to look at them again?
And our YouTube channel. So you read the whole thing for yourself. We're going to blitz through the headlines. But what do you think of that, Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, I think it's fair. Whistleblower status is an important freedom to protect.
Trump doesn't seem to be doing a good job of that with Mr. Assange, though, does he?
Yeah, but I was thinking more in terms of like a Chelsea Manning. I mentioned Assange, but then I realized, he's not actually really a whistleblower, is he? I kind of was doubling in my head, and I thought, God, he's a truth teller. He's also, he's a complicated truth teller, because there's lots of truth that he doesn't tell as well. There's a lot of subterfuge, I think, in that game. Also, there's when you get into the Chelsea Mannings and the Julian Assanges and who's the Snowden fella. Snowden particularly, you get into his it always starts with army guy, then tried to get into the special forces, broke his ankle, went to Switzerland, was out for drinks with a couple of Swiss bankers, and they were talking about how they were going to honey trap one of their colleagues and blackmail him for money. And then I was on the fringes there with my scotch and water, just thinking, Jesus, these guys are more dastardly than I thought. And then, of course, got foiled their plans, got their briefcase, ran away with all the data. Do you remember when that happened, Jim? Do you remember that was part of that backstory that Snowden got a hold of the briefcase? It was part of that whole create the myth of the invincible singular component of a conspiracy to better make to vilify singularity. That whole thing, if we let this one guy loose, he might have the keys to all of the information in the world. That kind of mentality. That's when they started taking off all our clothes at the airport, and when they were trying to sell that concept that that the individual is the greatest threat to the state. That whole mentality that somebody can get a hold of the one floppy disk. It's the Hollywood story of terrorism, and that's essentially where we're at now, isn't it?
I've never watched the film, but I'd like to. I'm more familiar with the work of the whistleblower William Benny, I think his name is. Who I'm really interested with the sort of stuff he had to say. But,
I love him, William Binney.
Our next article, Laura Moat, and this is from refuses to let WHO investigate truth behind the origin of coronavirus. China have refused to allow the World Health Organization to join Beijing's investigation into the devastating virus. China has been criticised for being secretive with regards to how it handled the start of the killer virus. Many countries believe Beijing delayed letting the world know about the seriousness of the COVID-19 outbreak. Gee, Craig, do you really reckon, with them silencing the doctor? And this is a regime that's always known for transparency. They haven't had Google build up a firewall around their entire internet for their citizens, or have a history of harvesting the organs of their political dissidents. I mean, this has always been one of the most transparent agencies on earth, Craig. Gee, imagine my surprise to hear that.
I feel horrible to make this conjecture, but I believe it absolutely to be the case that between the reported date of the first victim was 7th or the 1st of December 2019 to the 22nd of January when the WHO was allowed first passage of its exploratory group into China from that period of time. I think that they were slaughtering dissidents. I wish I didn't think that, but I believe that whether in small or large degree, that to some significant degree, all of these people who we now believe to be missing are very likely. I think we're seeing a period of disappeared.
But that's a belief, not something we can source.
No. I hope it's not true. I just get that feeling. Yeah, I feel horrible that that's the case. But what a hideous thing. I don't know what's going to be next with that, Jim. You've got this crazy subterfuge going on where there's faith in the behavior of the WHO in some camps, and then in other camps, complete loggerheads, like in the States. So another complication of what we got going on in the UK, that we're in bed with the WHO and all of their diktats, and the Yanks, to some degree, certain states, it seems, and definitely the Trump administration, is in complete opposition to their to the point of like calling them out as incompetents and saying that they need to explain themselves and investigations need to happen. So we're in a very polar opposite world, aren't we?
Speaking of polar opposites, so we don't rehearse this, but that's actually a really good link to the next segment that I've got here. Our last podcast on episode 4, we mentioned how this SAGE group was very secretive, and we don't know who's on it apart from people like Google and other such people who people go, are they really a scientist? Sure. And a couple of others. Listen to episode 4 if you want to know more on that. Or was it the 3? I can't remember. Listen to them all. They're quite good. So this is an article. Yeah, subtle plug. This is from. So I'll just reread that again. Sometimes it drops out. That's the only mention we'll make of it. Speaking of that, before tech concerns, I have invested in a new microphone, so I'm aware that the sound quality of my end hasn't been that great on the podcast. We're aware of it. I've ordered one. It's going to get here in a few podcasts' time, I'd imagine.
It looks good the way you're doing it.
You're going to have to put up with my sound being the weak link of the podcast. My apologies. So, top scientists set up Shadow SAGE Committee government amid concerns over political interference. Top scientists are setting up a shadow version of the government's scientific advisory group for emergencies amid concerns about dangerous political interference in advice to the government. Sir David King, a former government chief science advisor, has assembled a group of independent experts to look how the UK could work its way out of the coronavirus. Gee, Craig, it's almost having like a group of secret people on a committee who aren't allowed to have the press have free range of questioning to them, and we aren't allowed to know what they're discussing or who's on it, and they want to keep that all secret until after the virus, while all the time having one of the highest death rates in the world. It's almost as if that wasn't good enough for these people, and they want to have a second opinion. To ask all the questions that they want to ask. We've covered that and sourced that in previous things before. Who keep everything secret until after the virus is done. It's one thing to have that it's not a good idea to have that if they were doing great and having one of the lowest death rates in the world and all the people were going, I think our government's doing a great job. But when they're doing a terrible job, that's another thing. Now, I'm not naive. Sometimes governments do need to keep things like spy secrets secret and all that kind of stuff so that they don't get outed in other countries. I'm not naive enough to know that government will always be totally transparent with us.
Sure.
However, it's a virus. The more information we share about it, the more we can help each other as a human race.
If at all, yeah.
And that was what I mean. Really, we should thank the UK government for their appalling handling of this. So,
if it weren't for the rot, there wouldn't be the desire to talk about it, would there? It's just so grim.
It is.
So
speaking of grim, that brings me on to our next article. This is from CNN.
Mm-hmm.
Deadly giant hornets killed 42 people in
what?
China.
One more time. Say again.
Deadly giant hornets killed 42 people in China. This is... hang on.
What a way to go.
I must apologise to my viewers. I've got the wrong article up. There was supposed to be another one because their deadly hornets have come back. This was from 2013, so we might as well just skip that one and we'll cover the one that I was meant to get.
What's going on?
My bad. I've archived the one from 7 years ago and got that the archives rather than the one from 1 week ago about saying they're back. But giant hornets to come.
Those hornets are back?
Yeah, in episode 6. We'll cover that. So
sure.
Moving on to an article that is up to date. This is by Lewis Casanio. Birx says government, this is on April the 7th, by the way. Okay. Birx says government is classifying all deaths of patients with coronavirus as COVID-19 deaths, regardless of cause. So the federal government is classifying the deaths of patients infected with the coronavirus as COVID-19 deaths. Regardless, the federal government is classifying the deaths of patients infected with the coronavirus as COVID-19 deaths, regardless of any underlying health issues that could have contributed to the loss of someone's life.
Yeah. The farce continues. It's farcical.
And I will now bring up something else about those underlying health conditions that we may have discovered since April the 7th.
Oh, yeah. What's that, the 85% of the people that were put on ventilators being killed?
I haven't brought that up on our archive, unless I can't remember.
You've seen that, though.
Yes. That's interesting.
Essentially, they're leaning away from the intubation route, which is is only complicating and leading to further mortality, apparently. But hey, we're not doctors. I read the newspapers afterwards. It's a mad thing. Now
so this is an article from The Guardian, and this is from Sunday the 3rd of May, so yesterday. Nearly half of England's doctors forced to find their own PPE, data shows. Again, this isn't quite the article I thought I had.
Wellies.
Don't worry,
half of them chose Wellingtons.
British Medical Association finds most doctors do not feel fully protected and a quarter are anxious or distressed. So I wanted to bring that up because that was only yesterday. So all the hoo-ha we've had, that was on our first episode that we recorded over a month ago now, Craig, about the lack of PPE, and still...
They're having to bring their own galoshes to work. It's madness.
Yeah.
It's madness. So even the people with jobs have stress. This thing's just, where's the good bits? Where's the good bits again? Oh, yeah. That, was the hotel in Dorset that had the haunted monkey? Yeah. And there was the girl that was trying to protect her immune system by drinking jizz shakes. That was good, right?
Yes,
from the last episode. You never forget that. You're doing what, darling? All right.
Yeah, this is the article I meant to bring up about, because it was meant to dovetail from underlying health conditions, and this is from the Mail Online.
Yeah.
So this is from
it's eminently Sunday, trustworthy.
May 3rd. That's why I got confused with it. So it's being fat triggers a troublesome immune response to COVID-19. Scientists fear as government SAGE committee investigates why obesity raises the risk of death. Scientists advising government ministers...
How is that a surprise? How is that a surprise? Only in a British conversation could that come as a surprise to anybody. British people just think like obesity is... that makes it makes some guys come quicker. Just like there's no association with health really in any category. Well, maybe many people don't smoke as much as they used to, I guess, but in most regards, people are just obesity is kind of a fact of life. I think really nobody thinks of it as a reason why they're going to be more or less ill. You agree with that?
I get visions of social justice warriors when the lockdown is over, taking to the streets with signs calling COVID-19 a fat-shaming virus. So obesity raises the risk of dying of coronavirus by nearly 40%. NHS data shows scientists have warned of a potential dysfunctional immune system. Fat cells may harbour vital immune cells, reducing availability, or the immune system may go into overdrive, called a cytokine storm. And that is by Vanessa Chalmers, the health reporter for the Mail Online.
I don't remember her name. I don't remember her name, but I put my penis in a really big girl once, and I met her on this is absolutely true. I met her on a beach. I lured her in with a bag of gummy bears, and we took our young love out into the lake. And she was big enough that I thought better get her into the water, because she's certainly able to move a little better. And then and I remember, I'm just remembering horribly, Jim. I hadn't thought about this forever, but how high and drunk was I? I wasn't high at all, but I had 6 Miller Genuine Drafts. I was just like, in those days, blotto. And I got her out onto the raft and began to move against her. And the raft was on a big chain. So we were able to we were like moving along as we were humping. And then it got to the end of the chain and started to go on like a circular arc. It was one of the weirdest nights of my life. But I can see how it relates to the coronavirus heightened risk of symptom.
Well, something that you had the brilliant idea of, yes. Mr. Campbell, was producing little 1-minute clips of our show as adverts. Yeah. Craig, that's got 1 minute.
Is that my 1 minute?
Take a note on the video player of where that was.
The big gal at the will, yeah. Where's that? Where's our numbers?
Story
Where are our
1.
numbers? Oh goodness.
That's it. Get the adverts out. Lure them in with the stories of penises and insertions, and to let them stay for the information.
For the impacting news articles.
Yes. So moving on, BBC defend. It's perfect that you said that story.
Is it?
Because I need time to load the next 2 articles. Actually,
oh, good. Okay. Good.
While. So BBC. This is from the Telegraph. This is the 29th of April. BBC defends panorama show that used Labour activists to criticise lack of PPE. The corporation said it indicated where relevant if contributors had previously criticised the government. So there are 2 schools of thought on that, isn't there? It could be Labour activists with the knife out, or the second school of thought is just because they don't have the PPE, but because they don't agree with the Tories, their view is then null and void. So, who knows? Where do you lay on that one?
Yeah, it's a funny one, and I've looked into it to some degree, and I think you've encapsulated it in that short comment. It's one of those things that it probably would have had more impact if there was no bias or no previous bias shown. But if the information stands up to scrutiny, then it's a point worth making. But I think it's undermined heavily by having partisan politics as part of it, and that they're even able to identify the detractors as the under the heading activist. Then you're into not a very sound piece of journalism to pylori anyone with. Unfortunately.
There is also the school of thought that says of all the people that may most likely to want to join Labour are the ones that have seen the NHS chronically underfunded for the last 10 years. There is that school of thought as well. It may be difficult to find a Tory voter that works for the NHS. I'm just pure speculation there. I'm just looking at we call it as we see it. We're political atheists, and there's different schools of thought for that one, I think.
Yeah.
And there's this one's interesting as well. This is from the Mail Online. This is from Martin Beckford and Glenn
I think also
Owen.
there's evidence of bipartisan evisceration of the NHS that's prevalent enough that it takes away any sort of partisan bias, doesn't it? Both Tories and Labour have been instrumental in the destruction of the NHS in their own particular ways. Is that not the case? You not heard that?
I mean, it's like saying we found a surviving member who was shot by the firing squad, and lo and behold, he didn't like that firing squad. So we wanted to point out to you that he already had bias, or he voiced his concerns about being shot by them. I mean, you could put that school of thought in there as well.
And you have the absurdity of Jeremy Hunt commenting on his own poor work.
We covered that in previous episodes.
There's all kinds of compromise there. But let's not go down old tracks.
Yeah. So
it's a shit.
The Mail Online. This is from, like I said, Martin Beckford, Glenn Owen. This is the 2nd of May. This is Police Chief warns officers to stop prancing around in daft TikTok videos during coronavirus pandemic, or they could face misconduct charges. Dozens of videos of officers performing their latest dances are going up on TikTok. Officers have been warned of the trend by police chiefs across the country. It is understood that Home Secretary Priti Patel takes a dim view of the antics. The performances include the quarantine canoe and the kick challenge. I think that's the first time I've ever agreed with anything Priti Patel has said, Craig.
Well, it makes you wonder whether she said it or not. Actually, to be fair, it makes you go when you're just like, what the? That happens all the time with both Piers Morgan and Katie Hopkins. You have those like, what? That's what I think too. What? It's one of those parallel moments where you realize, half of the people that you hate are right most of the time. It's just like, oh shit. I like it when it happens, but it's like an Elon Musk moment where we had it recently with the last episode. It's just like, why am I agreeing with this dickhead? He's sending up, string of pearls satellites to spy up our holes for the rest of our lives. But suddenly he's had an epiphany about the American Constitution and the freedom and rights of people. And just like, oh God, I want to hate you so much, but now I can agree with you. It's like. Madness. But Priti Patel's she's a loon. She's a lunatic. She's an actual loon. Terrifying.
I mean, that's one of the reasons you and I became friends, was because we didn't ever come into the idea that the cult of personality is a good idea, or the cult of a party. I am a Labour activist, therefore I must agree and defend all of their policies. I think that's why we're political atheists. We go on each thing that each person says separately, each idea that each party represents separately, and take them all on the idea of common sense without falling under the umbrella of any particular cult of personality or political agenda.
Yeah, get hated by everyone.
Yes, works for me.
And you're not a green? No, not a green either.
So our next article is from CNBC, and it is from yesterday, Sunday the 3rd of May. Gilead CEO says remdesivir will be available to patients this week. We've donated the entire supply. Gilead's antiviral drug, remdesivir, has shown success in helping coronavirus patients recover faster. We intend to get remdesivir.
Go ahead, do it again.
I'll just say Remy from here on to patients.
The R word.
Yeah, the R word. To patients in the early part of this next week. I may not. Do you know what, Craig? Because I don't watch any mainstream news.
Right.
I just read. I just make up my own opinions on the facts.
You just read half of articles.
I could have got that pronunciation completely wrong and have no idea. So, to patients in the early part of this next week, beginning to work with the government, which will determine which cities are most vulnerable and where the patients are not that need this medicine. Gilead Sciences Chairman and CEO Daniel O'Day told CBS's Face of the Nation. So looks like there could be some kind of treatment in the works there, which is nice. And again, me and Craig aren't doctors, so what do we know? We are repeating what we've seen.
We know that that's, I think, about $1,000 a hit US, and we are pretty sure that some of the people involved in being its greatest advocates are also people that have financial ties to it, and it's certainly one of the more expensive prophylactics, I guess you might call it, or treatments, or attempted treatments. And I believe, depending upon dosage, it's pretty well known that the side effects in overdosages, which I believe again is quite a slight amount, are catastrophic. They're quite like we're talking major organ failure and real ugly stuff. So it's hopefully not going to hurt many people that it saves. We can keep our fingers crossed for that.
But again, we haven't got the archives for that to source. So go and look everything that Craig set up yourself. Make up your own mind. But talking of talking of catastrophic effects, this dovetails into what we were saying earlier about lockdown being a double-edged sword. I don't deny it has its benefits, but it would be foolish to deny that there are no long-term consequences of it. So this is from Thursday, the 30th of April. This is from the Metro. This is by Zoe Druitt. Liverpool on verge of declaring bankruptcy because of coronavirus.
They stole themselves. Actually, they stole themselves. The Scousers have they ran out of stealing so much that they actually stole their own solvency. So it's quite a tragic situation there. What the hell has happened? How do you even get to a point where your civic city hall loses its coffers? I suppose is that what it is? Are they supposed to be making money to begin with?
I'll read it out. Liverpool is the second city in the UK facing bankruptcy due to the coronavirus crisis. The city's council is said to be considering imposing emergency spending controls after the government failed to offer anywhere near enough support when the pandemic hit. Community Secretary Robert Jenrick pledged that councils across the UK will be reimbursed for their emergency epidemic spending, but Liverpool councillors say what has so far been offered barely scratches the surface. Wow. The council will spend $78 million through increased costs and loss of income because of COVID-19 this financial year, the Liverpool Echo reports. But it has only received $34 million from the government in 2 tranches, with the second lower than the first.
I love tranche. Just a great word. Just love tranche. You remember you didn't really know much about tranches until Assange's outfit started dumping them, and probably who's the other one? Anonymous. That's what I'm thinking of. That would put tranches onto the internet. That's when you started to know about it, wasn't it? Another tranche. Like, woohoo! For all those information hounds.
Well, it was like the word austerity,
How's that?
It just, all of a sudden, it was all over the place.
It was there. I don't, Jim, to go back to that article, I don't know. It seems really odd to me that that the coronavirus could so destabilize the finances of a city that it's going to go bankrupt, and what does that mean anyway? I mean, we're just in a world of like, who closes for business? The libraries? What's lost? What are they responsible for?
I assume everyone's still paying council tax, but I don't know.
In Liverpool? Well, now we've arrived at the crux of the issue. They've got to be the Greece of the UK, don't they? What do they got? They got the Beatles. Yeah, love, love, love. And Hitler. And oh yeah. They don't brag about that one so much.
What connection did you just say?
Hitler. He visited Liverpool prior to the war. I told you they don't spend a lot of time. Love. But what about Hitler? It's like, let's talk about the Beatles.
playing.
We'll put up a Hitler visited Liverpool article.
Oh, well, I mean, probably visited lots of places.
I think he liked it, by all intents and purposes. I think.
But did they like him,
Well, so, not when he started bombing them.
Yeah.
That always swings a personality. Like, I used to like that guy. So he started, burning our city.
So after the lockdown, have you got any plans to play any clubs in Liverpool? I think...
Not now.
Yeah.
They just ended. They just ended in the last 3.5 minutes.
Any Liverpool comedy clubs looking to book Mr. Campbell, please employ extra security.
Keep ringing.
So, speaking of extra security, the Mail Online. This is by Lord Sumpton. I'd never heard of him before the virus, but I kind of like the guy now. Locking up the elderly until coronavirus is defeated is a cruel mockery of basic human values. Former Supreme Court Judge Lord Sumpton gives a withering critique of the government's lockdown.
Well done.
COVID-19 is not the greatest crisis in our history. Nope. It is not even the greatest public health crisis in our history, but the lockdown is without a doubt the greatest interference with our personal liberty in our history. It is normal at this point to add in peacetime, but we can forget that. Even in wartime, we never confined the entire population to their homes 24/7 if they did not have some excuse acceptable to a minister.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder, once we go to the next level on our podcast,
thanks, Lord.
Try to get guests. I wonder if we can reach out to this guy. I'd love to get him as a guest on the show. He's been critical of the, not necessarily the lockdown, but like what you said, the hypocrisy of it and the overreach of it from day one. I'm becoming quite a fan of this former Supreme Court judge, I must say.
Yeah, and that he's coming from the point of view of human rights, which is interesting as well, because as you know, the European Centre for Human Rights has also condemned the lockdown. So coming from that same position is interesting. But it's strange as well that he didn't push the point of the greater effects of on humanity, on society, which is did he bring that much into? He didn't really hover on that too much. Not certainly in the article.
He may have done. I haven't scrolled down that far on the article. So
because he didn't seem to be coming from that, but he came more from rights and freedoms, which I respect and appreciate. But it's also, if we're talking about it just saving lives, it's going to devastate. In fact, now, from this period forward, is exponentially going to devastate more lives in more different and exciting and weird ways than COVID-19 could ever dream or hope to. So he didn't seem to be coming from that position, but that's the greater, that's the, as they're starting to call it, the massacre. I won't overuse the H word because it's disrespectful to equate. But there's a lot of death and destruction coming on the back of these decisions. And that's not just a human rights thing. That's just like, a stack the bodies horror show thing, which is brutal. It's one of the reasons I have trouble talking civilly with people about it, Jim, is because to not take on board what the greater risk to society is by the statistics of the detriment on people's lives. I don't know how anybody can't come to the same conclusions. I realize that's part of my own echo chamber working, but it's still confounding to me that people just don't see, like they know now how many people are missing out on cancer diagnoses, right? Like just stacking up. Like it's stacking up, and that's going to take so many more lives in so many brutal ways. We're just in a gross place. All these undiagnosed ailments.
That judge is sticking to what he knows. He's not an economist. He's a law guy, and he sees abuses of human rights. One can argue the law is there to protect everyone's human rights, and he's sticking to what he knows. I'm a big fan of that, guys, from what he's been saying about the human rights thing. And at least he's the one person to really stick up from the judiciary that I've seen to really say, hang on, guys, flattening the curve is one thing, but going through people's items at Tesco's to see what they bought is another.
Can I just say, Jim, that there's nothing cooler than a cool judge. you know, like a judge that's really passionate, and I know it. You know, I know it's probably like a rarity, but early days in my experience with Law and Order had a friend that rolled his vehicle, spun it out, and rolled it on its lid, and then got charged by the police for speeding, and he took it to court and he fought it. And I was there as like 18-year-old kid, like an older buddy of mine, and we went to a makeshift court in a elementary school. So it was already quite surreal that we're in like small desks and stuff like that with the judge. It's like totally insane Canada, and my friend began to ask questions of the officer who wrote the ticket. He had like a list. It reminds me of you, Jim. You know, somebody that just has his shit worked out and all the questions he's gonna, you know, how would you know how fast I was going? You didn't, you know, go by the radar gun. Oh, because I could see by the skid marks that your car made. How did you know they were my vehicle skid marks? There were other skid marks on the pavement. You know, this kind of like, so the cop was getting agitated, and then there was like a uncomfortable exchange between my friend and the cop, and the judge put down his gavel, Jim. I still remember this like it was yesterday. The judge put down his gavel, and I was just like, oh, what's going to happen next? And he said, officer, please remove your hat in my courtroom and answer Mr. Norman's questions. My friend, I'm thinking at the time, said, remove your hat in my courtroom and please answer Mr. Norman's questions. And I was just, Jim, I was just like, holy fucking shit. Like I was like, I had answered my pet. I was like, holy fuck, I've never seen anything like this before. And then my buddy just got like through a couple more questions and the gavel came down again, and the judge, I'll take this to my grave, I'll always remember this, Jim. The judge said, I believe if Mr. Norman had an attorney, he would ask for a dismissal, and that's what I am granting. Bonk. Just like, I was just like, cool judge, yeah. We were just like rocking, and we got in that '72 Mustang that had the windscreen ripped out of it, and put on our snow goggles and drove home. Like, yeah. It was one of the greatest days of my life, Jim. Sorry. So cool judges.
That's clip number 2.
Sure.
I love stories like that.
It's amazing. It's just like, wow, it's so wicked. You can imagine when the judge said, like, remove your hat. I was just like, what the fuck? I've never heard anybody talk to a cop like that ever. You know, it's just like wild. And then just like fairness. He was just fair. He was just like listening to what happened. And they're just like, no, you can't. Not, and you know, I can't digress on that. I can talk about that all day and enjoy doing so.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, this is from I love that story, by the way, New York Post. This is Natalie O'Neill. People with low vitamin D levels more likely to die from coronavirus study finds. So people with low levels of vitamin D may be more likely to die from the coronavirus, according to a preliminary study. Researchers at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital Foundation Trust and the University of East Anglia in England compared the average vitamin D levels of 20 European countries with COVID-19 mortality rates and found significant relationships between vitamin D levels and the number of deaths caused by this infection. Before I hand this over to you, Craig, I'd like to point out that it seems that sunlight helps you beat the coronavirus and not being fat helps you beat the coronavirus. And I wonder what the lockdown does to those two things, Mr. Campbell.
And smoking and sticking pins in your eyes is still bad for you. just for everybody who needed to hear that. Actually, so I read at some point that smoking helps with Alzheimer's, apparently. So, you know, there's some, you know, every cloud.
So,
we've learned a lot.
Story. This is the Mirror.
We've learned a lot today. Thank you, Jim.
Sorry?
We've learned a lot today. We've learned a lot about coronavirus and the added risk factors.
Well, I mean, we want people that listen to our podcast to live healthy lives.
Yeah,
you know,
get that vitamin D in you. Get out there in the
give
sun.
us views and nurture our egos and tell us how wonderful we are.
Yes.
So this is by
zinc.
the second...
And vitamin C. You heard me. Eat it all. Vitamin B. All of the vitamins. Get them
in our non-educated opinion. Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
don't ask me about the dosage.
I mean, I'll say this, and this is not an advert for anything, but
No.
there's a vitamins that I've taken for the last 9 years. I've not got ill as a result of colds or anything like that.
Yeah.
I've got food poisoning from a dodgy curry, but I've not actually caught anything. But that's not exactly scientific evidence. It's purely anecdotal, and who knows? But anyway, so this is the Mirror. This is Matt Hancock, shamelessly fiddled figures.
Where was his hand?
Matt Hancock.
Oh, right. Oh, Matt. Oh.
Matt Hancock shamelessly fiddled figures to reach coronavirus tests target. The health secretary brazenly added 40,000 tests in the post, 80,000, really taking place, and Labour have backed an inquiry into the government's handling of the crisis. Madness. That's by Aaron Sharp on the 2nd of May.
Madness, Jim. We live in madness.
It's incredible, really, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Think about it.
Yeah.
Have you got any comments on that while I load up?
Well, just there are links that you would send people to see that the testing for COVID-19 or coronaviruses are just one of the most compromised elements and aspects of this entire mystery that we're facing. That the different regions using different tests and what they're finding and how they're finding it, and some places going, most places going by symptom rather than by lab confirmation, and it's just a farce. We're just back into that. It's a farce. There's no reason to trust or believe that any of the tests presented are going to be anything other than inaccurate, to say the least. That's my feeling on it. Again, these are all opinions. You want to swab your nose or get your gullet, fucking shoveled out or whatever you got to do for the test. I also don't like the fact that they're looking at a worldwide, essentially a DNA swab for people. So I know there's some tests, I believe, in the States, but it may actually apply over here as well, that don't take DNA, and there's some that are being recommended because you can do them at home. I don't know the figures on that particular, but that might be something to consider. But the idea of the government coming door to door and pulling your DNA out of your face to find out whether or not you have something that's a threat to 0.01% of the population is retarded. My opinion.
Agreed, and agree. My opinion agrees with yours.
Good.
My non-educated, never having any qualifications in medicine or nutrition of any kind opinion agrees with your opinion as well.
Exactly, two guys drunk in a pub agree with each other. Yeah, I don't know on that one either. No, you too?
This is how you want to lead your life, son. You listen to me. Right, so the New York Post, this is by Daniel G. Murphy. Oh, yeah. I've worked the coronavirus front line, and I say it's time to start opening up. This is an American article, by the way, so his courses might not be, necessarily true.
So in fairness, he only knew about the front lines through other people's history in the last, 6 months of 2017 or 1917, 1918? When did the Yanks show up in World War I again? 1917, wasn't it? The last ones? Passchendaele, I think, was one of their big ones. Anyway, they showed up, and so when he says front lines, he's kind of he heard a rumor about it. He's not exactly sure what he's talking about, but he probably meant Pearl. It was like Iwo Jima.
Well, he says, I'm an emergency physician at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx. I have been in the ER every day these last few weeks, either supervising or providing direct care.
Yeah.
I contracted a COVID-19 infection very early in the outbreak, as did two of my daughters, one of whom is a nurse. We are all well, thank God. COVID-19 has been the worst healthcare disaster of my 30-year career because of its intensity, duration, and potential for lasting impact. The lasting impact is what worries me the most, and that's why I now believe we should end the lockdown and rapidly get back to work.
Wicked. What a cool guy. What a life that sounds like. Emergency doctor, 30 years in the game. Were both daughters nurses? That guy sounds cool as fuck. There's some cool people on this
George
show.
Clooney is, they're buying the scripts to his life, and Clooney's going to play him as we speak.
Yeah, only because Alan Alda's too old. He sounds like Alan Alda to me. He's that's awesome.
So one of the reasons that he might be saying it's a good idea to get back to work, despite the risks, and
yes.
I'm not suggesting for a second there isn't a risk, I'm just saying there is a risk of not as well.
Yes.
And this is from ITV, and this is from the 22nd of April. Hundreds of people have become homeless during the coronavirus lockdown.
Do you think?
Says Mayor of Greater Manchester.
Ooh.
Hundreds of people have become homeless during the coronavirus lockdown. Speaking at a weekly briefing on the region's response to the pandemic on Wednesday, Andy Burnham said 344 people had been recorded as newly homeless and requiring accommodation since the strict restrictions were implemented. He said the Greater Manchester Combined Authority had helped 1,140 homeless people to be housed during the crisis, but 115 people were still sleeping rough in the region. Before I hand over to you, I'd like to point out that homelessness has been on the rise in the UK before the coronavirus outbreak. Mm-hmm. So I'm certain we would have seen a rise during this period anyway. So how much of that would be attributed to the coronavirus, I have no idea. But do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it's got to have some relation to unemployment, right, Jim? Like, doesn't, sure. and these are skyrocketing numbers. I think I know more, to my shame, actually, about the American numbers right now. This week, it just went into 30 million since the beginning of the crisis, Americans out of work, which, of course, is going to inflate their homeless numbers. But the thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about the homeless, Jim, and I don't know if the statistics are the same here in the UK, but strangely, they're finding in American homeless populations that they're not catching COVID, or they're not certainly like, it's not racing through homeless camps and killing hundreds or thousands of them, which is interesting, and they were searching for clues as to why. I think it's because like that, living in, sort of more risky environmental conditions, probably conditions to some degree with the proper nourishment, of course, your immune system. That was my theory. Like you're eating more food with dirt on it and in closer quarters with people. And, essentially there's a potential that you might have a more robust immune system than somebody who leads a more sanitary life. I'm guessing. I don't know. But it is curious. It's an interesting element of this, that it's not massacring in the ways that were predicted homeless populations. There's a teeny weeny bit of bright hope for that entire subject, because I wouldn't wish homelessness on my enemies, of course. It's just a hideous modern phenomenon that's just, I've seen it in my life acutely. Vancouver has a famous homeless issue problem. Toronto does. I've lived in both of those cities. Los Angeles does. I've lived there. London does, and increasingly, you've probably seen it as well as I have, Jim, over the last 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. You're just seeing it, become more and more. It's just aggravating in that we just seem to not have an answer for it. You saw probably, did you see that? We could throw up an article. It's quite spectacular. The Finnish response to it in housing all of the homeless people. Did you see any of that recently?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's incredible. They dealt with it by just saying the only way that people can possibly get onto their feet from abject poverty is having the security of a place to live. So they made it basically a basic human right of their country, that no matter what, no matter how dire your straits are, if you don't got a pot to piss in, you are provided with an address. So in the infinitesimal off chance that you could be offered a job, you have an address to give them, no matter what. And it's, obviously for security purposes, it probably has some compromising elements, but it's pretty awesome. We can put up that information, because out of the horror show that is global homelessness, before you even get into the developed nations problems with it, the idea that Finland kind of in one fell stroke made it a thing of the past is pretty, I love the Finns. Go Finns. Keep drinking that vodka. Keep beating the Americans in what do they have, the mass shootings?
Again, we've got the.
Well done.
We're going to that part of the world.
Yep.
Again, Jock, it's not my strong point,
Sure.
but we're going to be
Entering
talking about
the sauna.
Sweden now.
Yep.
This is an article from Fox News by Nick Givers.
Yep.
WHO, that's the World Health Organization. Sweden, which avoided mass coronavirus lockdowns, should be model for the world. This is the same WHO. Wasn't there that guy saying we need to come and
take your kids?
Yeah.
We're going to come to your house and take them to
a safe and second location. Manner. We need to take people out of their homes
by
in a safe and
hairs.
dignified manner. This is that same WHO, by the way. And didn't they say about China's policies of it, of vicious brutality?
Ireland's least healthy man.
That's great. So this is that same WHO, by the way.
Right.
I happen to agree. Well,
with some things, why not? Some things aren't crazy.
You can't argue that Sweden. Sweden hasn't had as many deaths as us. I don't feel. Well, we need to source that, but I mean, it's certainly we'll have a look at. And in terms of population as well, so there's a whole argument.
Yes, of course. Yeah, there's gives and takes, and you understand that. There's that to be appreciated. But what they definitely are not going to have is the avalanche of related to lockdown deaths that we're going to experience, and that in itself is a success, isn't it?
Their cities aren't going to be going bankrupt, and they're not going to have that rise in homelessness. I think but that's just the two things we've covered on this podcast, let alone the food supply problems we've covered in previous podcasts as well. So,
but they might have some
a top official from the World Health Organization praised Sweden on Wednesday as a model for the rest of the world in fighting the novel coronavirus. I just want to get the date on that because it says
he loves to pick a winner.
This is published 4 days ago. It doesn't say a date. It was published 4 days ago. So I think we are, and today's May the 4th, so end of April. I think if we are to reach a new normal, I think in many ways Sweden represents a future model of if we wish to get back to a society in which we don't have lockdowns, said Dr. Mike Ryan, said while speaking to reporters from Geneva.
Well done.
Ryan, who serves as an executive director for the WHO's emergencies program, praised Sweden's healthcare system and credited it with making all the right moves from the beginning of the outbreak. So I presume that isn't the guy that said we need to safely remove people from their homes in a dignified manner. That WHO. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, they're just a terminally polar response and agenda presenting entity, right? They're just like constantly contradictory in their behavior, and this is just another example of it. It's like, well, if they thought that was a good model, why didn't they recommend it for other places, right? Like, we're all following WHO diktats, and then suddenly the place that's not following the WHO diktats is like their biggest baby to champion. We just live in Nutland. We live in Nutland. We talked about this, every episode nearly we talk about that. Just it doesn't matter what these lunatics say anymore because there's no congruency to it anyway. They're just it's a soundbite, right? Yeah, get a picture taken with the poster, and here's the trophy, and it's just madness. We just live in Madland.
Speaking of madness, this is our final COVID article, and we're going to do some non-COVID news as well.
Get this virus behind us.
This is from the US Sun. You know my views on the Sun.
Sure.
This is by Lucy Sheriff, and I've actually got a problem with the headline that I'll tell you after I read it out. So the headline is Dance Macabre. Sick vid shows dancing nurses carrying corpse of coronavirus victims as they copy TikTok pallbearers memes. And it goes on to say a video posted on TikTok that shows 4 nurses carrying a fake coronavirus corpse has been slammed for making fun of the victims of the disease. The video shows 4 people wearing nurse uniforms carrying a 5th individual in a plastic bag with COVID-19 written on their feet. The clip is reference to the popular dancing Ghanaian pallbearers meme, which is based on a real company in Ghana that carries coffins while dancing. So before I hand that over to you, I just want to say to begin with, you and I discussed whether we should bring up this article because we're not quite certain its validity and all that kind of stuff. And you've got to question the source, which is the Sun. But already I'm going to say sick vid. I don't need the sun to tell me what emotions I should be feeling. Now, I do think it's sick, but I don't need them to tell me that. They should just give me the evidence and let my emotions come up for themselves. It's not their right to say, if they want to give an opinion piece, Lucy Sheriff wants to give an opinion piece, she can say, I find it sick, but it shouldn't be in the headline. It should just be video shows. It shouldn't be sick video. I think it's a sick video, but they shouldn't be having those kind of words in the headlines. People should make up their own minds and their own emotions. Leave them out in the headlines. That's my own thought on that headline. But yeah, I don't think that's in. Speaking as a comedian that has said on many occasions probably things in bad taste, especially early on in my career.
Hello.
And do we know if these people are nurses or not? Who knows? But if these are nurses carrying something like that, doing a TikTok video like that, I even in the earlier days of my career, I wouldn't. If someone had said, "Hey Jim, do you want to do that?" I'd be like, "No, that's just a step too far." I mean, what would Britain think if the firefighters of Grenfell were doing a little dance as they were trying to put out the fire with the screaming children and people in the background? I do. It's think
absurd.
That's it,
yes, of course.
It's not the Sun place. It's not the Sun's place to tell me what I should be thinking. I've come to the same conclusions then, but it's not their place to put that in a headline. That's not journalism, in my opinion. When you use words like that in a headline, what do you think about that?
Wait until we see the morticians dancing. That's when it's really gonna. That's when it'll open right up. I understand. I understand dark humor. I understand. That what's that great expression for it? What do they call it again? Gallows humor. But it also it undermines greatly the the belief that there's also a front lines where bodies are stacking up if they've got that much time on their hands to jerk around. But again, we spoke about it before. We don't have the authenticity of whether or not those are. There's rumor that some of those are fabricated videos, which that in this day and age wouldn't surprise me either. So, it's it just also it reeks of again the contrast between us not being able to go out without being conscious of social distancing and being ordered back in the opposite direction if we happen to go to a grocery store and walk the different direction than the arrows on the floor, and we're in this tight stricture, and there they are like doing the can and hugging each other and swinging a fake dead body around. It's just like have some class, have a bit of decency, just like doesn't anybody play checkers anymore? What the fuck is wrong with you chicks? Just like Jesus. And dudes, I'm going to be modern too. There's always the old Floyd Nightingale kicking in,
So who knows what to make of that? And we are certainly supporters of we're aware that the vast majority of nurses are doing a fantastic job under very difficult circumstances with a distinct lack of equipment, and Crew's podcast is definitely on your side. But like I said, we call it as we see it. That was an article that came up on the news, so we've covered it. And moving on to non-COVID news, this is from Sky News on May Day. That's the Friday, May the 1st. Yeah. Possible tectonic activity detected on the moon. There's this assumption that the moon is long dead, but we keep finding that that's not the case, say the researchers. Right. Tectonic activity has been detected on the moon by researchers who have discovered a system of moving ridges topped with boulders on its near side. There's this assumption. Oh, it's just repeating itself. What do you think, Craig?
Well, I don't really have great curiosity towards that sort of stuff, just because it's not provable to me personally. I don't find it that intriguing. In honesty, I've never before seen anything that looked like tectonic plates on the moon, or ever heard them discussed. Have you?
No, that's why I thought I'd put it in there.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? That idea of there's a whole new category of science that we didn't even know existed. It's kind of like, holy shit. But it just takes me into, it's one of those things that makes me realize how little I know, I'm just like, don't know. How would they figure that out?
And that's why, during this last section, just bringing in a bit of news that's just a bit like, huh? We might not necessarily know what to make of it, but I thought we'd just bring this sort of news to your attention.
Yeah, like when you talked about the oxygen being found in the galaxy far, far away. It's like, wow! It's like wild how they can figure this shit out now. but it's just like it's very, very hard for the mind to extrapolate to. I had a roommate once, Jim, that was working in a hadron collider, not dissimilar to the large one in like Switzerland, France. And he would go to work, like to university, to study as a professor. And how I'm living with him as a young comedian with no deep scholastic skills at all. But he'd come in like after working really long, like he'd be gone at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and I was like waking up at 2 in the afternoon kind of mentality, and just crossing each other like ships in the night. And sometimes, Jim, I'd really try hard to understand what he did at the university. I'd be like, oh, so like you like one gets shot and then the other one gets shot and they like hit each other, and then you try and find out by their shrapnel being captured in certain materials, what type of energy came out at what direction. And I go into these great, deep descriptions, trying my best to try and figure out what is it that you do, Tony? What do you do when you're not here? And Jesus, Jim, he'd just like look at me and just be like, no. Like you just say, like just real flatly, like, no, that's like nothing like what I do. And I can't even explain it to you. And I was like, okay. Have a good day. But
another little science discovery. Sky News.
Yeah.
This was in the last couple of days. Scientists have discovered a crazy beast mammal which lived alongside dinosaurs on Madagascar approximately 66 million years ago. It was about the size of a modern cat or an opossum, according to researchers at Stony Brook University in the US. I'm looking at the picture. It kind of looks like a cross between a badger and a skunk. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. It's officially called Ad al-Athurium Hugh, which literally translates from Malagasy, the national language of Madagascar, and Greek as crazy beast. So again, oh, I've knocked the video over. Never mind.
Isn't that wild? And about the size of a skunk badger, kind of, or looked like. Is that size as well?
It's about the size of a modern cat or an opossum, but the picture of it you can see in the archive. It will be on the comments section of our cruise videos found on the cruise Facebook page and the YouTube channel. Just search for Cruise Craig Campbell, Jim Grant. You can see the picture for yourself there.
It can't be crazier, but it's true. Did you see today the monkey on the motorbike that tries to steal the kid?
No, but that's
we can put that in.
Written.
It's amazing. Like a monkey rocks up on a motorbike and like does a pretty good job of kidnapping a child. It's unreal. It's unreal. It's crazy, but true. 100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Send the link.
We'll put that in. 6. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, podcast 6. We'll cover that one.
Nice.
That can be our opening story for podcast 6.
Nice.
And how are we doing for time?
I think we're pretty close to close. So let's thank these people for coming. Give me 1 second here. Yeah.
Let's make. Well, we've got one last.
Yeah. Totally.
This is again from Sky News.
Yep.
Tesla applies to become UK electricity provider.
Yes.
The US firm, known for its electric vehicles, also has operations in battery energy storage and solar panel manufacturing.
Yeah.
And the application was made to the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority by Tesla Motors Company. It did not make clear whether the firm had applied for the license. It was filed on Tuesday and signed by Evan Rice, Tesla's energy products sales director.
Well,
in 2017, the car maker built one of the world's largest lithium-ion batteries for the Australian state grid. So Elon Musk looks like he's trying to get into the UK energy market.
Looks like he's trying to claw back some value to the company. Have you seen the plummet in share values and price?
It was too high. I mean, he's been behaving. I saw he crashed his car the other day.
Yes,
as well.
Yeah, he's gone off the crazy rails. It's pretty wild to watch Elon. He's really he's a interesting character right now. But yeah, that's apparently I don't know if that's playing into his potential investment in the UK, positive or negatively. But at the minute, I believe he's down several billions over the last few days. In fact, due to his outrageous behavior, I suppose. for asking for the rights of citizens to be paramount rather than the rights of those who wish to imprison them. See what happens.
Who knows what goes on with that guy? But
the monster.
A big thank you to everyone for watching our 5th episode of The Cruise.
Thanks.
You can check us out on Facebook, on YouTube. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please like, because it really helps us grow the channel, and we've got plans to be able to expand this. Down the long term, we'd like to be getting on guests and post-lockdown, go and chat to them and everything like that.
Yes.
And thank you for all the kind words, your support. And like I said, if you've got an article that you want to be brought up on air, just tag Cruise on your Facebook page or stick it in the comment section of one of the YouTube videos or anything like that. And we're really grateful for you watching, and stay with us until my new mic arrives. And any closing thoughts, Mr. Campbell?
No, that's you're succinct as always, and wonderful speaking to you. And thank you for coming back to speak to us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on episode 6.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.